welcome all, and thank you very much for joining us tonight at the CDT. We've got a fairly robust program. Very happy to see you all. We're trying, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the CDT and kind of what we're about. But we are, by definition, a center for digital transformation, and we ourselves are transforming and will consistently try to test or experiment or do some new things. They will not always work. We will adapt and tweak and evolve through the course of that, as we are. And the real goal of this is not to be some very formalized approach and very regimented and everything is rehearsed, because it's not. This is a community, it's an exchange, it's an interchange. So that is our goal. Hopefully you all had a good chance to meet and network a little bit out in front, and we'll conclude the evening with that. So as you think about interesting things, hopefully that you've heard or people you'd like to chat with, at the conclusion of our program here, it'll take us about an hour and a half. Then we'll wrap up and kind of shoo everybody out of here really quickly and head back out into the lobby so that it's a much easier place to kind of facilitate. So that's kind of it in terms of an approach. So let me tell you a little bit about the Center for Digital Transformation, myself, but more importantly, the team here. So the CDT is a center affiliated and associated with the Mirage School of Business here, called Mirage School of Business at UCI. And there are several centers that have been formed over some number of years that try to advance or focus on a few key areas that the business school and or the faculty and folks like myself who come from the outside, from industry, think are important to drive, and to do so in new ways where we're actually communicating and collaborating or pulling together professionals from industry or experts, consultants, and academia to kind of solve or focus on some big overarching opportunities, challenges, and issues. And we have selected over the course of the last couple of years this concept of digital transformation. And what does that mean? How companies are tackling it. The simple premise is that all of us in our daily lives, whether you are a Fitbit junkie like me, or just working with your mobile phone, or dealing with your documents in the cloud, or exposing or being exposed to kind of some of the new things that social media and some of these things provide, we are all living in an increasingly digital world. And for business, this is becoming ever more pronounced. So beyond just the relatively simple things like we discussed, companies are increasingly shifting more of their business infrastructure and such into these digital enabled environments, but their products and services are becoming more and more digitally enabled. And so that's the area that we're really kind of focused on. And if you are a business or a company that has been doing what you're doing for some time, you probably did not come from that world, and that is, by its definition, as you move there, a transformation. There are also many companies and businesses and people who are starting, from point A today and moving forward. And sort of in theory, they would be more digitally enabled or more capable moving forward. So we're trying to figure out in a number of areas how the kind of the juxtaposition or the intersection of those two can be more enlightening and enabling through the course of that. So we have been running now for a better part of a couple years this series of events that we call AD exchanges on a few different topics. And we're very excited and proud to say that we're about ready to sort of expand and grow our agenda here a little bit. The big data and analytics is one of those critical topics in the broader area of digital and digital transformation, and how do we use data? What are the implications of that? How do you gain insights to perhaps run your business better, hire smarter, launch new products and the like? But there are a number of others. Lots of interesting areas in digital marketing. What are the implications of all the technology and the architecture that CIOs or CTOs or non-technical people have to sort of deal with or take advantage of? And certainly lastly is the leadership equation. What does it mean to lead an organization, to start one in a digital kind of enabled business, or arguably very challenging to transition, to make steps forward or even major leaps as how you run your business going forward. Those are the areas that we're particularly interested in, and with your help and insight and some great experts and panelists that we'll bring to you periodically, that's our kind of mission and goal. Does that make sense? So tonight, we are kind of taking that up a little bit of a notch. So the CDT, Center for Digital Transformation, has run a couple of these different programs. We have one on digital healthcare, this one on big data and analytics. We also have run for the better part of previous version, something we call a CIO roundtable. So we have many of our members here tonight. This is a group currently at about 20 plus members who comes and works with us quarterly, where we gain a lot of insights and back and forth, and we share some information with them. And we are, again, trying to kind of drive that agenda forward of the best practices or learning or key insights or challenges that these folks are going through. We just had one of those meetings this afternoon. They're generally, pretty private and closed. But we also took the opportunity to showcase the venue that we have here, which is the Cal IT facility, which is an incubator and accelerator where university-backed researchers and scientists from literally all over the world are here doing very interesting research, some at the most basic biological and technical level, some pretty sophisticated products and services and software and things like that, and are either started or born here or sort of grown through some stage and then graduate into becoming the future digital companies of tomorrow, and we have a couple of those represented. So we took a tour of that and got to see the kind of great facility. And then lastly, we're tying that into our reception and our event tonight. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And we expect to do no less than probably one of these about every other month or so on different topics and the like. And we'll be launching a bit more around how do we get this information. Some of these are videoed, some of these key comments and the speakers and the content available to you digitally. So our real goal is to create a community. And that is in part how these events are intended to run. So one of many of these experiments we're trying is you have to sit there and certainly listen to me to kind of open this up, but to interact with our panelists. I'll facilitate and moderate that a bit. But we want to kind of hear from you, let you ask questions both in the traditional format. You see a piece of paper there that Leslie will come around and sort of gather if you've got some questions. We also are increasingly using, hi Leslie, thank you, using digital channels to kind of help do that. So you can submit them on our Twitter feed through the CDT, and we'll pick them up there, and if we can't answer all of them tonight, then it gives us a chance to come back later and ultimately do that. And then last but not least, as I said, we want to continue this sort of discussion, so we'll move everybody out of here and then allow you to kind of engage with the speakers, each other, and the like afterwards. So that's kind of the rules of the game. Looking forward, we've got a few other programs. You see some stuff up here. What I can just share with you quickly is there's a pretty broad research agenda led by my colleague Dev Bhatia, who's a longtime tenured professor and guru of technology and digital here at UCI. And then we're also working on some exec ed and other educational programs. And as I said, the digital distribution of this content and some other kind of advisory services. So that's kind of the CDT in a bit of a nutshell and our kind of macro agenda. We are extremely fortunate that we have lots of interesting people and interesting companies involved in either members of our CXO roundtable and or increasingly a number of sponsors that we have that support these different activities. A little peek ahead. We are just wrapped up the roundtable, as I said, today. Our next event for that group is our annual retreat, and in addition to having Ken join us tonight as a guest speaker, he's been so gracious to host us at the SpaceX facility on June 20th. For those of you who've never had the chance, or maybe have seen it on 60 Minutes or something, super cool. Ken will tell us a little bit more about that. And we have some kind of exciting programs around innovation and things that we'll be doing with our members there. Our next idea exchange will be on the 10th of June, and it is on our, what I call our vertical of digital healthcare. We've got some world-class experts on standards and interoperability in the healthcare field, and the real premise is around this concept of patient-centered care and how can finally, hopefully, the technology start to unlock some of these things and allow many more of us to be much more engaged with our healthcare providers and ourselves and perhaps others to create a better experience there. So keep that one in mind, and hopefully we'll see you then. Quickly, as we get the program started, one of our implementations this last time was some surveys. These are available online, and you have them on your chair. We live and die by kind of your feedback. So we've made a number of adjustments and tunes so far on what we do and how we do it, and we would love to also hear from you around ideas for speakers, topics, whether you'd be willing to participate in some way, contribution, time, effort, sponsorship, that type of thing would be great. And last but not least, we've made some efforts and a whole bunch more coming here over the summer, I'll say lull, or kind of, I guess, looking forward to a lull, of how we distribute out and maintain a greater engagement going forward with communications. So last but not least, here is the team. So at long last, you're like, who is this guy up here? Tim Stanley is my name. I'm the exec director of the CDT, Center for Digital Transformation. Came on board officially in January. I've been on the advisory board and steering committee for a couple of years. And Dev Bhatia is the other good-looking gentleman up there. We've been teaching together a class that we call EDGE, which is this topic, sort of compressed down to about 10 weeks for MBAs and executive MBAs. And through the course of that, and a number of folks in the room and others who've been involved, this is our sort of passion in life and our sort of goal and mission to figure out how to help more companies and more businesses and more individuals contribute and excel at this digital transformation. Megan Marburger is manning the technology back here. She's a long history in working with small growth, big idea kind of entities like this, and happens to be our digital guru, social media expert. And then Leslie, who's, I think, taking a seat here, the back will be rolling around the aisles, gathering your questions and calling you out and helping me make sure that you're engaged in the whole conversation. And Debbie's not here with us tonight, but she works on the research side with Vijay. So without further ado, let's get to the good stuff, shall we? I am particularly pleased and excited to have a panel and the kind of the unique format that we are going to try or tweak or experiment with tonight. The basic premise here is starting with big data and analytics as sort of a backdrop. What are the implications or the opportunities to drive into a digital enterprise? First of all, hopefully we will kind of define maybe what that vision of a digital enterprise is or could be. It will obviously vary differently for all different kinds of companies and industries and sizes and scales. But then look at going from just data and analytics, but how would those things help enable new capabilities in a company, new ways of advantage or competition, and in many cases perhaps even new products or new business models that these companies do. That's sort of our basic premise tonight, and to help me do that, and frankly to do a much better job than I could ever hope to do on my own, I have 4 rock star panelists to do that. First will be Vinnie Marciani, excuse me, who is runs a company called Deal Architect, and contrary to what that perhaps sounds like, it has very little to do with deals or architects per se, but all about this idea of digital enterprise and transformation. And Vinnie has just completed a pretty fascinating, and I would just say a bit of a jealous journey, where he's been traveling around the world the last year, interviewing and meeting with executives of some of the biggest and most well-named companies in the world, looking and talking and understanding what their vision and how they're transforming as a digital enterprise. So we're particularly lucky to have Vinnie here tonight to kind of share some of that insight with us, and not just from, as we often try to do, a local company flavor, but literally some of the biggest and boldest companies in the world. Then we'll kind of move into a format where Vinnie will spend a few minutes up front, and then I'll have Dev Bhatia come out next, we'll kind of introduce him there, CEO of a company that was incubated here with university backing, and it's in a very interesting, very exciting area of technology and big data inherently, which is a search company. And I'll leave that with you because that sounds like something that, why would anybody do search today? There's certainly a large company or two that does that, and I think you'll find, as in many cases, there's lots of white space and lots of interesting things that can happen in that Next will be Vivienne Ming, who's the chief scientist of a company called Gild, based in San Francisco. And Vivian will probably blow your mind about the use of data and insights and informatics around human capital, talent, and a whole bunch of other things that I sort of won't give it away. But it's a very cool company, very insightful, and very much exemplifies this idea of how do you use data in radically new and kind of interesting ways, data that you probably didn't even realize exists to make you better. And then last, but certainly not least, will be longtime friend and colleague Ken Venner and SpaceX, and a company among others that Elon Musk has with Solar City and Tesla that almost sort of epitomizes or defines the digital enterprise today. And a number of different or arguably even controversial approaches around how they verticalize and how they sort of tackle the way they go to market and create products and the like. And so that's our agenda tonight. And we'll spend a few minutes with each of them, kind of letting you give their own overview, and then we'll make it a very interactive forum. I will reach out from time to time for questions from the audience, and then at the end we should have about 20-30 minutes or so with the whole entire panel to really kind of mix it up, which should be fun and interesting. So without further ado, let me introduce Vinnie Marchandani. Come on down and come on out.
Good evening. I didn't get the memo you were going to get up to 100 degrees So, sorry, I'm the only guy in the tie in this room. So. Sorry about that. I'm going to spend a few minutes, like Ken mentioned, what recently I was very lucky to be part of. How many of you have heard of Software AG? I know you're dating yourself if you say you work at the company. It's a 40-year-old company, first known for a database product called Database National. Does that ring a bell? And only the guys over 55. Anyways, CEO of Software AG, Tom Hans reached out to me last year and said, I want you to help me write a book on innovation. What kind of innovation can a 40-year-old database company talk about? Well, he said, I made a bunch of acquisitions, and I acquired in-memory computing engine, invested in a platform as a service company. I made a bunch of acquisitions. So the conversation proceeded. And then he goes, I want you to interview some of my biggest customers. And I thought, big German companies, they're based in Darmstadt, Germany. Next thing I know, my email is getting introductions to C-level executives in Nissan, Coca-Cola Enterprises, Daimler, and Echo Entertainment, and it's Rolodex. Any one of you would kill me. So then my next question to him was, I don't mean to be rude, but if I talk to them about your products, that's going to be a very boring book. So I don't want you to talk to them about my products. Talk to them about where they are investing in innovation. Talk to them about how they are becoming digital enterprises. So this afternoon, I had the opportunity to present to the CIOs for about an hour. Now I've got 10 minutes, and then the lady with the Google glass tells me tomorrow I'll have 2 minutes to present to 1,000 NSA analysts. So the audience keeps getting bigger, and the time gets shrinking. So let me walk you through a few slides on the book. So the biggest thing that I got out of the book, and I've written several books before on innovation, was the excitement of C-level executives about technology. I've been in the business a while. You can see what's left of my gray hair that I have been involved with a bunch of killjoy projects, Y2K, ERP, worthless, large, low ROI projects. And if you talk to the vendor community, the excitement is about Snap, right? Social, mobile, analytical, cloud. These companies talk to me about 30 other technologies: advanced robotics, virtual reality training, complex event processing, semantic memory for mass customization. And these are CEOs talking with them. Right? So there is so much excitement in the executive suite about the power of what I call systems of advantage. We've done systems of record. just a lot of money on the ERPs. We're starting to do systems of engagement with social technologies and customer experience projects and so on. But we're moving into the stage of systems of strategic advantage, competitive advantage. And that was a big takeaway from it. And, like I said, common digital language, 92 companies in 10 countries, 25 large brands. And in Singapore, and Tokyo, and Germany, every one of them is fluent about technology strategic advantage. So, exciting time for all of us in technology. Let me give you a few examples of some of the case studies from the book. So GE is investing heavily in what it calls the Internet of Things. Right? So they have turbines that talk to each other. Turbine can tell its neighbor, hey, I'm being more efficient because my blades are pitched a certain way. Why don't you consider pitching your blades that way? As a group, the turbines can talk to the grid and say, I'll be pushing too much power through. We can slow down. We have storage right here. We can slow down and store it in our portion of the grid. Okay? They can talk to the maintenance people and say, I need fixing or predictive maintenance. So every one of their machines, and that's just turbines. They're doing that with their aircraft engines, they're doing that with their locomotives, they're doing that with their commodity scanners. In fact, they're arrogant enough to say, smart machines are passe, our machines are friendly. So to them, embedding technology in their complex projects is a big strategic advantage. Mapfre is a Spanish auto company. Very different from, they don't produce anything, they serve insurance. And the case study in the book talks about how auto insurance companies don't like young drivers. It's a fact, they think they're unreliable, they think they drink too much, they think they go into the wrong places. They just consider it bad. Mapfre analyzed the pool of under 25 Generation Y drivers. And the value they found was risk is driven by the nature of the commute. When, where, how, more than the age of the driver. So they launched a new product for Generation Y. It's called Y Car, based on telematics analysis of driving patterns and so on. And Y Car has become more than just a premium pricing tool for them. It's now become a tool service. With the telematics, they can do a lot of additional value-added services. Coca-Cola Enterprises talked about how this particular division, this is a separate company from Coca-Cola. They run the number of the franchises in Western Europe. So they deal with a lot of 7-Elevens and so on, those markets. They talked about a mobile app where their merchandisers go into a store. They used to, count so much in the cooler and maybe another 40 kilo Sprites and maybe 22 root beers, whatever. Right? It was a very manual process. They spent 15-20 minutes at the store. Now they take a photograph of the cooler and they take a photograph of the back office inventory, and through crowdsourcing and some proprietary algorithms, within 2 minutes, they get a photograph back that says, reconfigure the cooler this way. And not only is it a systematic, very accurate restart, but it's based on what people can see selling, depending on where the positioning of the product is. Now here's the kicker. Having done that for soft drinks, other consumer product companies have come forward and said, you know what? Can you do this with a toothpaste? Can you do this with a shampoo? Okay. A simple mobile app is revolutionizing how we look at banks, Mercedes-Daimler talked to me about machine-to-machine networks very well. They're doing a lot of robotics on the shop floor. And they basically want as little human involvement. And you can imagine the semantic definitions that I could do to allow robotics to talk to parts systems, to talk to other suppliers, to talk to portions of the plant and so on. So they're focused more on the next generation plant, robotics, virtual reality training, etc., etc., etc. TUI is a German travel company. What they described was how technology is aligned with the reshaped business model. Traditionally, the travel business has penalized you when you change plans. Guess what? I've paid maybe $2 million to Delta for making changes. Each one of them has done that, right? They just don't like us making changes, or at least they enjoy making money off our changes. So we realized that that is an unpopular business model. But now that they know mobile phones and SMS and so on, a certain customer is in Barcelona for the weekend, and they have a room available for another night. They text them and say, if you stay another night and do this tour, we'll waive any changes. So they're completely rethinking the travel business in terms of packaging, not just airfare, but a whole variety of products, and also how they're pricing and how they're pricing for changes and so on. So technology is allowing them to rethink the travel business model. Standard Chartered talked to me about mobile apps. Now, every bank has a mobile app, right? And so on. Their differentiator is most of their high-value clients are very risky countries: Nigeria, Pakistan, India, China, where networks aren't very good, crime's high, et cetera, et cetera. So they talked about how they are going to rationalize some of the risk assessments and manage to mine a very affluent customer base in each one of them. And by the way, a very mobile customer base. So Nigerians travel to Dubai and expect the same level of mobile app or same level of banking service to mobile. So, just a few examples from the book of how they're using not just mobile, but robotics, complex event processing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And examples of just from that chart, 6 countries. Let's shift gears a little. Many of the companies that I interviewed talk about big data and analytics, like Alliance, a German insurance company. CIO said, insurance is all about analytics. So there's always been, I don't know why it just dawned on us, because we've got actuaries, we've got reams of data. But he's driven the entire company now to think about analytics as driving. Now, the big thing about, hopefully there's a further discussion for the evening, is 6 years ago, just around when we had the recession, I was flabbergasted that so many of the Fortune 500 missed the recession by such a wide margin. Right? I mean, God, look at the investment in databases and Hyperion, SaaS, God knows what, trillions. And yet, we completely missed the big recession. So at that time, I was interviewing the National Hurricane Center. I happened to live in Florida at the time. And their track record over the last 50 years has gotten better and better. 50 years ago, 3 days out, the corner of the hurricane was like 500 miles. Now it's down to 150 miles. Every mile you don't have to evacuate something, the cities save $2 or $3 million. Every mile they want to evacuate. It's chaotic, a lot of emergency services, a lot of crime and so on. So they can show tangible results of improved analytics. So as I was interviewing them, I said, how have you gotten better, and why is the Fortune 500 so off? We invest heavily in capture technologies. So we've got geostationary satellites, we've got hurricane hunters who fly through the storms, we drop a lot of sensors through the storms so they can capture humidity and wind patterns and so on and so forth. We have sensors in the buoys in the ocean that give us height information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's mind-boggling the capture technologies they get to the place. 6 years ago, that seemed like a pipe dream. Today, every one of you has access to so many data outputs, describe all data. You look at it, if you're a consumer parts, social networks give you a lot of data, consumer. Honest, authentic feedback. I hate this company or whatever. Right? Getting it through social networks. Mobile devices. I'm giving you a bunch of GPS and other information about what consumers have. You look at sensors. Now the amount of data to get GP and other companies. All kinds of motion, humidity, sensors can measure so much distance. Satellites, all the mapping, imagery, the GPS data that we're able to get through satellites. Surveillance, a lot of video data that is available here is amazing. And very few companies are taking it. Public agencies are starting to take advantage of it to combat crime and so on. The private sector is not really taking advantage of the video technology that's available. So as you go through all this, robotics is generating money, drones are generating data to allow monitoring a lot of oil companies and so on. Okay? So given all these data process, our big opportunity in data is to triangulate sources of data that we never before been able to do. One of my biggest disappointments is even though all this ocean of data is available, people still go back to their internal systems and still use Hyperion to come up with the forecast. That is so 1990s, and yet most companies persist with that model. So hopefully we can have we can kick that off during our panel. But fascinating the data sources. And this is just 6 years after I interviewed an actual American said I thought it would take 30 years to get this year we're ready. And available fairly cheaply most of this time. The other fascinating thing that's happened is new forms of what I call data governance. So if you look at new forms of analysts for consulting firms, systems integrators, like most in Chicago, that do nothing but analytics. There are communities like Chicago where you can throw a major challenge at them, and they're doing some complex analytical work, where Alaska Airlines has thrown at them a variety of flight data and operational data. These scientists are optimized much better than Alaska based on internal analytics. Very sophisticated communities are involved. I was talking to an outsourcing firm recently about where they take digital security people. And the CEO said, I would love to hire all the Eastern European hackers together. He said, I don't trust them, so I won't hire them. But the reality is, they are probably some of the best employees that are out there. The sophistication of what they can do is scary. You've got Amazon has a thing called Managing Curve, where you can throw at the community and they'll do all kinds of analytics that come mundane, but it's a source that's available. Berkeley and other schools have data science programs. I should say UCI on some of them. There's some that are really standing out. Estonia, I was telling the group earlier about how Estonia has become one of the most digital societies in the world. And as a result, about 5 years ago, they had a major denial of service attack. It's widely known it was from Russia was an outage. And so based on that, they approached NATO and said, we want to set up cyber war, center of excellence. Can you imagine hiring a couple of those analysts with those security teams and analytical teams? That would be pretty nice to get a couple of those. And then there's a group called LIVA, which one of the cities and counties North American crime fighting units used to was so the city of Vancouver had a riot and they sent to NEVA 400 hours of video data, and within 15 days they had identified 50 people that knew what happened. So these guys do nothing but like Boston, bombing, So we have a new generation of capture technologies. We have a new generation of cameras. It's a great time to think about complex data problems. Now, let me just throw out one other thing about formidable that I thought was. Even though I talk about systems of advantage, they can quickly become systems of disadvantage. First thing is technology is available to everybody. The barrier to entry to acquiring technology becomes lower and lower. So when I was starting to go down or at least in the book, you could sense the sense of whatever we iterate will only last us 2 years. So the response is to whatever you're taking generation 1, 2, 3 of every generation. when are we ready to roll out quicker and quicker initiatives? There's the, unfortunately, very negative customer experience that 35 years ago. So Ford launched high touch as their UX and touch. Consumer reports don't buy cars that have high touch. It's so distracting, it's so difficult to figure out. It's dangerous. We're seeing that with wearable technology, the way people are reacting to that, privacy concerns. So that's the risk of being digitally advanced ahead of the market. The whole IT work, I said to CIOs, 30 years ago when I started my career at Warehouse, most of us were custom coders. We reluctantly accepted that. We had every excuse to say, I'm different, I'm not even a package won't do this for me, it's fine. We've gone to the other extreme now where we've become too dependent on packages and not really enough custom development. We come up with systems of advantage. We cannot depend on SAP, we cannot depend on Accenture, we have to depend much more on the self and custom built data sets, custom built apps, etc. And which means more sourcing, not outsourcing. But finally, we are entering there are very significant risks. Target is just one example. Estonia's cyber war is another example. There are some massive risks in this model of innovation that I don't think are security folks have picked up. And especially in Europe, the whole privacy thing is a major issue. In the US, they're much more flippant about it. They haven't become enough of a backlash. Or in Germany, my God, if you don't show you're sensitive to privacy, you could lose your bad customer business. They have forced people to withdraw cards. You mentioned the word NSA there, and so hopefully that gives us a little bit of a kick-off point. Yeah?
It does indeed. Thank you, Vinnie. Very great. Come on and join me over here. And I happen to have a lovely copy of your book. That's great. Thank you. And I want to kind of tee it up with a couple of questions. Yeah. A little loud again. No, mine's definitely on. So one of the... please. Yes.
Tim's one of those energetic guys who actually just prance around. And I'm just a little bit younger than him. So.
It's the East Coast, West Coast thing, I think, for sure. So one of the things, Megan, if you can hit to the next slide, that we've got several copies of Vinnie's book here. It's excellent.
It's actually Carl Heinz's.
I know.
I'm just keeping that later.
We won't give it away that Carl didn't really completely author his entire book. This is Vinnie with a nice packaging around it. And for those who have got some very pithy and interesting questions, a copy for you. So how would you do that? Leslie, who's wandering about, will take your little note card if you want to quickly fill out a question through the rest of the course of the deal. And since we are talking digital here, right, for all of you Twitterati out there, or not, here's a great opportunity to finally figure out how to use Twitter. We actually take a number of feeds in, and you can ask them that way as well. So that's kind of our...
Since the NSA is here, don't worry about it.
Exactly. Make sure you're thoughtful about what you ask and how you ask it. So that's the approach there. So the thing that I really wanted to get to, Vinnie, is as you've talked to all of these companies, there was clearly some insight in there around new products that were developed or new insights they were developing. But in this definition of the digital enterprise, was there a couple of, kind of common themes or something that you would use to maybe help define what that looks like and some attributes that these companies have?
I would say three themes. I mean, there were many different themes that came out, but a lot more investment in the front office. So either product-centric or customer-centric. A lot more investment going on there. So revenue-centric IT rather than cost-centric IT.
Mm-hmm.
So big change from the last 50 years. Very, very high-level executives. I mean, I interviewed several CEOs and very fluent CEOs about the opportunity of technology, how they can influence product, how they can influence business model, etc. So it's moving. I mean, the thing is, it's moving out of the organization, which is great for everybody in IT because they're getting more attention, more budgets as a result. The other trend I would say is I found the more supposedly laggard the industry, the more the momentum. So railroads, for example, are just mind-boggling stuff with sensors on their tracks so they can monitor heat and noise to be able to see which wheels might be about to lose some ball bearings, and they can predict catastrophic accidents. Sports is just going through a revolution. I mean, there are fan analytics, there are revenue analytics, there are injury analytics. There's no aspect of sports operations that is not being revolutionized with digital technology. Insurance has been a laggard industry. Amazing in auto insurance. Everybody's looking at telematics as a way to better manage risk. Other areas are looking at complex event processing, manage fraud, stuff like that. So the laggard industries, there is no laggard industry. Is a better way to put it. The other thing is how little the difference is between the U.S. and so many other countries. I mean, the fluency and the innovation that's coming out of Germany in particular is, as I was doing my interview, I talked to a couple of U.S. CEOs and I said, quit worrying about China, start worrying about Germany. Germany is investing in so much advanced robotics, next generation semantic memories and so on. They're ahead of us. You can see that in Mercedes and BMW cars. I mean, just chock full of technology in the product. You can see that in some Siemens cars, you can see that in some Lufthansa services, you can see that in DHL logistics. The country is re-energized, redefined by technology. So that's the other thing is we tend to be a little arrogant here, especially in California and Silicon Valley, that we there's lots of gifts to the technology and there's a lot of stuff going on around the world.
Very interesting. So let's see if we've got a question in Twitterati land or out in the audience. Megan, do we have ones come in?
Not yet. Not yet.
A lot of very digitally savvy folks. So the one that's on my mind, Vinnie, and I know from many of the folks in the audience here, you mentioned this kind of executive support thing, and that's one of the big drivers. And frankly, that you're not seeing, or there aren't as many laggards anymore. Everybody's in there. What do you do as someone who kind of sees those opportunities, but is held back in some way? I mean, what's holding back this greater rush towards more digital enablement? Did you get a sense of that? Was it technology? Is it still IT's moving too slow? Is it the business folks don't understand it?
I think it's a little bit of, it's tough to rush from a movie. It's a 0 to 60 issue. As far as innovation goes, IT is better than 0 for a long time. Honestly. No matter what Oracle may say, no matter what IBM may say, no matter what SAP may say, IT has not innovated in the long term. And to expect it to go from that standing start to something radical is really a massive push to overcome that inertia. And that I find is a massive. What's the hashtag? Spending on traditional ERP and computer center and so on. And almost like, that'll take care of itself. Almost got to de-emphasize that. And the radical viewpoint I have. We can start focusing on technology and product, technology, customer facing areas, technology, business model enablement, technologies and channels, and so on. That shift is taking a lot.
I actually couldn't agree more. In most cases, as a recovered CIO myself, innovation officer, I think one of the things, and part of the goal of what we're doing here, is also to get more exposure to some of the new and interesting things or technologies or companies that are out there. You mentioned the SMAC stack and the things there. There's so many interesting ones as you called out. They're in visualization and sensors, augmented reality, and a variety of different technologies. And I thought probably a good segue or opportunity to bring Dev Bhatia in from SRCH2. Dave, you want to step up and join us here? I'll let you drive a little bit. But Dave, as I mentioned, is a company with SRCH2, incubated here at UCI. I'll let you drive this a little bit.
Cool. Thank you.
Give us a little bit of a background and overview of SRCH2 and how you came about something as seemingly done or solved as search, and how that actually can help some companies maybe do greater or more advanced innovation going forward.
Very good. Very good. So listen, guys, my name is Dev Bhatia. I'm the CEO of SRCH2. I'm just delighted to be here. Every time I come to this room and to UC Irvine, I'm amazed at the intellect in the audience, and I really mean that. First, there's a lot of people I know here, so I already know you're smart. Second, there's all sorts of questions I heard outside indicates you're smart. So one of the things I want to ask you guys, you guys know any search engines? Anybody name a search engine? Ask.com, very good. Somebody else said Jeeves? Anybody else? Alta Vista, there's a man. Showing your age. Any other search engines? Netscape. Oh my goodness.
Wolfram Alpha.
Did someone say Wolfram? Alpha? Right on. All right, so we are none of those. SRCH2 is an in-memory search engine. And the big idea, well, before I get to the next slide, the big idea is the cost of memory. You guys know, I think, because you're in a select group, cost of memory is driving a lot of trends in this world. Memory cost has declined every year significantly from the year prior. That enables all kinds of new capabilities. It's the dance with the data that's changed, and changed in a step function way. So first of all, when I say cost of memory, we're talking about cache speeds as opposed to disk insertion speeds. For those who are technologists, disk goes away over time, right? We're going to be replacing that. It's going to be all memory. It's going to be all cache. And in an enterprise, that means significant things. It means new applications of search. So when we talk about search, we're not talking about web search. We do talk about Google, but only to say, you see Google Instant, it's awesome. It costs a ton of money and a ton of resources for Google to do what it does. We're enabling any enterprise, whether that's on a search box on their site, whether it's internally on their dashboard, whether it's on a mobile device. We're enabling everybody else to do what Google Instant alone can do right now. And not in a web search context, but rather Yelp searching across its database, or Salesforce searching across directory listings, or people within your contact base. So the big idea is memory is cheap. The solution, the innovation, in our case, is we built an in-memory search engine from the ground up. So we look at our competition not as Wolfram, although I would love it if it was the case. We look at ourselves as people who are competing against open source. How many people here have heard of Lucene? Right on. See, I told you, this is the smartest crowd I've ever pitched to, right? Solar. Yeah, right? Elastic. People think Elastic is awesome, those that know of it, when they compare it to Lucene. Elastic took Lucene and enabled it to be about big data. They enabled it to be distributed. Awesome guys. They've done an amazing thing. However, Lucene was designed 14 years ago. Right? It was designed a long, long time ago. It was built in Java. It was designed for a world with certain constraints. Number one, cost of memory in '99 compared to cost now. Cost of memory is about to equal cost of disk. In the next year or two, that will happen, and that means significant things. Another constraint, location. You built a search engine which really didn't take location into account. If you've done it from ground up, if you rebuilt that search engine, you might make the index geo-aware. You might take advantage of your extra memory or the lower cost of memory to do a double index. To add in a new index. Anybody know what an inverted index is? Yes, sir. Please. No? So an inverted index is a representation, a virtualization of your database. Right? We added an innovation, Chen, who's the founder of the company, added an innovation called a forward index. A forward index is a representation in integers of all the forward possibilities for any set of keystrokes. So I typed in CAN, I could mean candy or Canada, or can I finish my homework tonight? All of that is contained in a forward index. And it's in integers, which means that it can be compressed. So now you're imagining a search engine with all kinds of different use cases than what you might have previously imagined. So imagine now a search engine, that goes away, re-architected to be completely in memory, right? All those constraints that we described previously, the cost of memory, now it's inexpensive. Geolocation matters a lot because, you know what? Most of the people who visit Yelp are coming from a mobile now. And so that matters a lot all of a sudden. Configurability, adding all kinds of new layers of flexibility, of friendliness. A forward index is really saying, look, we're taking from memory and extracting some benefits that we're going to now enable everybody else to take advantage of. So literally the search bots ought to be friendlier, error-correcting search as you type. One of the first implementations of SRCH2 was actually at this university. It was the directory at this university. Show of hands, anybody ever here use the directory at UC Irvine? Anybody? Yeah? So the directory, if you go to the directory at UC Irvine now, we're actually doing a split test. And they've been kind enough to enable this. So if you go to the directory, there's a link on it called psearch. That was the original thing that Chen developed as a search engine. So you can actually see the results. If you type in Chen Li at the UCI directory, there's a lot of Chens and a lot of Lis in that directory. His name doesn't come up on top. If you go to the psearch version, by the time you get, I don't know, 5 keystrokes in, his name is on top. More relevant, keystroke by keystroke. Imagine Google Instant, but applied to this world. Now, Google, when they came out with Google Instant, they're a great thing for us because they're a good selling tool. Now, I can go to anybody now, imagine Google Instant, but imagine that on Ticketmaster, Mr. Ticketmaster, right? Imagine Broadcom. Listen, guys, imagine Google Instant, but every consumer has it. And by the way, it's a very painful search experience. It could be a lot better, even at a lower cost than what is there now. So imagine Google Instant, and then let's talk about their numbers. When they rolled out Google Instant, Chen had already developed and launched psearch 2 years prior, which is the university type. It enables more advanced search as you type with more advanced error correction. And they, in turn, came out with their numbers. Their numbers were, hey, you know, every time anybody in the world interacts with Google, it takes X number of seconds. We're going to reduce that by 2 seconds, which is 40% of the search time. Think about this for a second. These engineers, they increased the world's productivity with this little feature. Now, the resources they took to do that, they have every query ever entered into Google since the beginning of Google, sitting in a database, in memory. Imagine that. Imagine the size of that database. Imagine the resources in memory to pull that off. It is truly mind-boggling, right? Hundreds of millions of queries a day. Every day since '98, sitting in memory. What server farms the size of the state of Ohio. So, said another way, Google is awesome. Google's doing something with massive resources. Now we can enable you and you and you to do the same thing on your search bots on commodity servers. Okay, that's the revolution as we see it. So, I've talked about it, I think the latency throughput, some of the advantages. These are really getting into the weeds of what we do. I'm not here to sell, so I shouldn't do that too much. But let's talk about different use cases. So the first thing I talked about was a search box being faster and friendlier. I mentioned how a developer can now launch search with much less resources on commodity servers, hopefully powered by Dell, and distributed very well, with great failover and all that kind of stuff. Now let's talk about things that are not obvious. So I mentioned the search box. Let's think of other things. I've got SRCH2 on my handset, a fully functional search engine sitting on a handset. Never been done before. HTC is one of our clients. HTC decided to replace SQLite search on their handsets. The next generation handsets that are coming out real soon are going to be running SRCH2 native. Okay? So now when I search for contacts and messages and apps on my phone, the things that are resident on my phone, when I search across all my SMS messages, when audio might, let's say I have 100 songs or 1,000 songs, all that at search as you type speeds, which means I type in INC and I got where I'm going, inception maybe, right? Very quickly. Now, we all know that on mobile, there's a very particular use case. Every 5th keystroke is an error. especially with touch. I was an old BlackBerry guy, so actually even this is a slider. I'm the last guy with a slider. One of the reasons for that is because of the errors. I hate those, right? But it is a problem. It is a persistent problem, and it can be addressed with great software. Another use case, which you might not talk about, I stole this slide. I'll give credit to TIBCO. So there's a story. We talked about this story for those of you who were present earlier. Here's a use case: complex event processing. Complex event processing. Vinnie talked about this. Here's how SRCH2 can help in complex event processing. If you are now doing step function faster speeds, so we're in the world of, instead of 70 milliseconds, a millisecond is 1,000th of a second. We're in the world of microseconds. Okay? So that, you may think, well, gosh, the eye can't tell the difference. I can't tell the difference between 5 milliseconds and 50. If you're a big bank, you got thousands, you got hundreds of thousands of transactions running at once. That makes a tremendous difference. Right? It means I need less processors to do the same throughput. Right? A typical event, I'll give you an example of an event. I pull out money from an ATM in New York. 10 minutes later, somebody acting as if they're me, pulling out money in Brazil. Okay, those are two different events. Right? To figure out that that second one is a false event, a fraudulent event, they had to run a complex event process. It's a serialized event. It cannot be parallelized. I had to do a read-write. I had to take some information. Now I do a second compose and write again. So this is a serialized process, a complex event. End of that process is the output. This is a fraudulent transaction. If you could deploy an in-memory search engine in the event stream, you're now saving on throughput. You're reducing the number of steps. That means the bank, in our case it's FIS Global, will have an advantage, right, versus other banks. The lower transaction costs, the lower risk. Right now, a bank like that takes risk intraday. When they approve that Brazilian transaction and they made a mistake, at the end of the day, they settle and they lose money. Yeah, so 98% of the time they win, 2% of the time they lose. And they're willing to accept that. So there are huge advantages that we don't think of when we think of an in-memory search engine that are maybe even bigger than the base case.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. That's awesome. We had Dave come speak to our class at the J and I teach together last year. A number of folks, perhaps like you, were again pleasantly surprised. There's this white space in this area, and as Vinnie talked about, folks can take some of these different technologies or approaches and apply them in different ways in your kind of custom solution or your approach, and create new value out of that. And that's kind of our theme around sort of this from information to innovation kind of approach, which I think is awesome. So let me kind of take the next step and introduce Vivian Ming, another one that I think for those of you who have not yet submitted a question or aren't Twitter literate or whatever, we did a little assignment with our class last week, and we said, go do a search on SRCH2 or Google or Alta Vista, or the Wayback Machine, and go see what you see about yourself. How many of you have actually searched yourself? Find anything particularly interesting there? Oh yeah, probably some history. I know who I'm looking at, right?
Isn't that called a selfie?
Yeah, that's the digital version of a search selfie. That's right. The interesting part about that is we all developing these digital personas, whether you know it or not. And there's lots of other people developing those sort of on your behalf. And I think that kind of really tees up very nicely for Vivian and what Gild and her broad set of research here as a pretty noted neuroscientist such as UC Berkeley and one of the key players at Gild. Vivian?
Thank you. Let's see. This is on. Great. So that's me. You don't need to hear the name again. And I do a lot of different things, from personal projects in diabetes and bipolar disorder to economic modeling of innovation cultures. At UC Berkeley, at the Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, my interest is in neuroprosthetics, particularly cognitive neuroprosthetics, literally building smarter people. I'm interested in educational technology and research, and I do that at my company, Socos. But one of the areas where I spend most of my time and I see the most excitement is at Gild. And what we really do there is take this broad principle of using augmented technologies to unleash human potential. Well, at Gild, we approach that by crawling across the entire internet and taking all of the little digital footprints that you leave behind and figure out what makes you great. And then we can go back to customers and tell them this person would be an incredible employee. And we use that technology to try and build better companies by helping them unleash potential. And our principal product is something called Gild Source, which is focused particularly on tapping into the potential of individuals in the technology sector, and in particular identifying people that have incredible potential, but which don't fit the classic model of a developer, of a great engineer. And so we spent a lot of money from our marketing team on a video, and so I think they'd feel much better about me showing that than speaking for the next 2 minutes. So we can go ahead and do that.
Tired of wasting time targeting developers who end up being unqualified and who don't actually have what it takes? Gild Source is the only tech hiring software that enables you to engage and hire candidates who stand out based on their proven skills. Gild Source finds developers where they're most active and actually demonstrate their knowledge. Sites like GitHub, Bitbucket, Google Code, and Stack Overflow. Not through typical recruiter sources like job boards and professional networks. This approach allows us to leverage powerful data science and proprietary algorithms to analyze the actual code and experience of millions of developers to help you determine whether a prospect is the right fit for your engineering team. We evaluate these developers on the quality of their work, including their actual code, and aggregate open source and social data. The result is access to millions of developer profiles, searchable by location, skills, name, or even narrower search criteria. Gild scores and rankings provide you with an instant assessment of a developer's skills and experience, so you can quickly identify and target the right developers to hire. Look to the expertise score to understand a developer's coding ability and technical knowledge, and leverage the demand score to understand a developer's experience, academic success, and formal achievements. We also show you score details so you can know exactly what's driving each developer score, including individual coding skills. Then, Gild Source provides a total picture of a developer's social media footprint, created by scouring over 80 social and professional networks, including blogs and personal websites. And with direct email access to candidates, you always have their attention. Gild Source. Finally, a way for hiring teams to come together to engage their next innovator and hire better developers faster.
Yeah, so that's what we do. We crawl across 100 different websites. We collect 54,000 variables across a database, in this case of 10 million developers. And we build a model of what really makes them great. And there is a home for everyone in our system. We actually have a database of actually more like 100 million people total. And we're working on some bigger projects with my research team. What makes a great cultural fit for a company? How do you get the most out of an individual employee? How do you make a transition into becoming a more innovative company culture by figuring out at an employee level how to get that out of them? So this is what Gild is about. Collecting all of this data that's available out in the world, it's all public, and creating a profile of individual potential, and then connecting that in the workplace to increase a company's productivity. And I'm going to keep that tight.
So part of the, I guess, premise here is digital enterprises sort of, if there is, probably a few key resources that sort of make a digital enterprise tick, we sort of hit on it. The programmers kind of are increasingly ruling the world, is that not? So that's really what you guys sort of help spelunk and find, not only a good fit or a list of programmers, but literally the best given the kind of culture or the environment or role that you're seeking for?
Yeah, so you are stuck in the painful world of working with Elasticsearch, and therefore you need to find a Java developer in Boston, we give you a list of all of them, ranked by how good we think they are on that specific skill. Or you could dig down deep and say, I need someone with Java and Angular experience. Plus, they have to know how to use these other additional techniques. Dig down in there and uncover all of the best people at that particular skill set. And what's most fascinating about it is, although we have tremendous amount of code that we can analyze, we can also do it predictively. So there's 54,000 variables. It's about looking at the things that actually drive and motivate people. We find the best code is really indicative of the kind of personality and motivational factors that actually make all of us successful. The best developers are a lot like the rest of us. It just so happens their passion is around development. But when you identify what motivates people, then you can find the right place to make them and their companies most productive.
And what sort of really enables a lot of this is the fact that many of these tools, as Vinnie was arguing, or making the case that you should do a lot more custom coding, or that's going to be where your system's at advantage or disadvantage. These are increasingly living in these open source databases, and you can mine all of that information and really get that insight.
Absolutely. So Elasticsearch is an open source. In fact, all of those Apache projects are out there and they're crawled by our systems, and we see that someone drop in 3 lines of code afterwards, and in fact did it run better as a result. So we can get that level of insight. And wouldn't it be nice to do that with your sales team and with your marketing team? But yeah, that's where we're at. And being able to make those individual changes, both in the sense of the effect that we can have in leveraging the digital space, but then that collateral effect that being able to leverage it has on the success of the company.
Pretty awesome. So think about that going forward. Your digital persona really does start to matter. So to kind of round out our panel, and then again, wait for those cards and letters to come in, let me, last but not least, introduce Ken Venner. So Ken is currently the CIO for a little company that does something with rockets, something like that, up in Hawthorne, California. And Ken, as we say, this is not his first rodeo. He is a longtime member and resident when he's not making beautiful wines up in Sonoma. He spent about a decade with Broadcom as the startup CIO and kind of leading that digital enterprise to where it's at. So about last 2.5 years now working with Elon and building out a team which has doubled, if not tripled in size and scale, and doing some pretty cool stuff. So welcome, and tell us about what it's like being a digital enterprise.
Sure. So clearly, as you said, this is the second somewhat startup I've been in my career. The first one was Broadcom, about 1,000 employees, $400 million in revenue when I joined, just came out of IPO, scaled it up to 10,000 employees and $8 billion in revenue. So it was a pretty decent ride. But clearly the SpaceX opportunity came up. It's 1,000 employees 2,000 years ago, building about 1 rocket a year. We're at about 3,800 employees now, and at a tact of 12 rockets a year, with the goal that Elon set to be 40 rockets the following year, plus reusable rockets. So really trying to figure out how to scale an organization, and fundamentally you scale organizations digitally. I think I've got a little video to give you a little bit of background about what SpaceX is.
T-minus 1 minute. Vehicles will start up.
All stations in the emission.
3, 2, 1. And launch of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket.
Dragon is in orbit.
Houston Station, looks like we got us a Dragon by the tail.
So that's what I do for a living. Pretty cool place to work. And back to digital, oh, there's more? No, you're just playing it again. It was really good. Digital transformation. So this particular rocket is designed, manufactured, and launched by the company. Completely vertically integrated. All done out of Hawthorne from a design and manufacturing perspective. Tested in Texas and launched out of Cape or Vandenberg. And when we say digital, it starts with 3D design models on top of Siemens NX-CAD tools. Literally then turns into simulation products that run on top of the hyper-performance grid we've got running at the company, so that we're simulating and assembling the entire rocket before we actually start manufacturing. And then we're moving towards even more digitally enabled manufacturing processes, having those CAD tools literally dump out CNC programs, or literally pressing a button and printing Inconel or titanium 3D printed part that literally is got no machining in it. There's just a print cell, kind of like your HP 3D printers, but in metal, that literally produce the parts and fold them back together again. And that's just the design to manufacturing side. That particular rocket you saw launching has 30,000 sensors on it, all of which are collecting information that are used by the control systems inside that rocket to literally control the flight of that rocket. And at least 2 megabits of that is streamed back to the company, where we're running 6 streams of simulation in parallel with the telemetry data we're getting back from that rocket, and then comparing the actual rocket data to the 6 simulations we've got to try to understand how the rocket performance is literally going against the pre-canned simulation models we've got to understand if we're in control of the rocket and it's performing as expected. So tons of digital data, and then layer on top of all of that, the thing that humans like to see, HD video. So this is the first place I've worked where HD video really makes a ton of sense. That rocket's got HD cameras on it, so we're streaming back various pieces of what's going on. So engineers are taking the telemetry data, time sequenced, in series with the video data, and if they see an anomaly, they're literally looking at the video feed in parallel with the telemetry data to visually try to understand what are the sensors telling me and what am I literally watching going on in that rocket. And that's kind of the digital transformation that Elon is driving in this particular industry, which he perceives the Americans let go of late in the 60s when we won the Cold War, hit the moon, and basically stopped investing in aerospace-oriented technologies. And so lots of big data to be analyzed in terms of telemetry data and simulation data, and at the same time a lot of digital innovation going, and that the entire company's average age is 26, and that's only because there's old people like me at the company, mostly college startups, who all basically think and breathe digitally. They don't actually think much in an analog world. And so it goes back to all the things these people have talked about. I just heard Vivian yesterday, and both became outrageously excited by what she was telling me in terms of finding the right engineers to join our culture, because this is a very strong culture that Elon is structured in the company, and looking for really top talent to join the team, and absolutely petrified literally how much she probably knows about everyone at my company and what's going on, and therefore my digital footprint actually has been assimilated together into something that says things about me I probably don't want it saying, and therefore a little bit concerned about what people are now capable of doing just based on the way we all interact and work. So that's it for SpaceX.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ken. So the thing I really wanted to focus on, broadly with the panel, but to tee it up with you first. We talked, Ken and Vivian both were kind enough to come to our class and sort of blow the students away, and you guys get sadly a shorter version of that, but more interaction. Part of the premise of SpaceX and several of Elon's companies, Tesla and the like, is to sort of run them more like a high-tech or sort of out of the semiconductor silicon world in Silicon Valley. And part of that was leveraging these different technologies, the classic sort of innovators approach of lots of experimentation, fail quickly, succeed, hopefully. And also just this agile sort of pace and methodology. So let's talk about that for a moment, maybe tee that up as what is the implications of that in being digital or sort of driving a digital enterprise forward?
Well, digital is a requirement to have that level or degree of innovation taking place at any particular time. So clearly being a vertically integrated company, and back to what, I forgot your name already. Vinnie, sorry. We're building our own in-house systems. We're not doing Oracle or SAP. Tesla had an SAP installation in, and they've ripped it out, and they've installed our ERP platform. We release every week a new release of the ERP platform to the company. So the expectation is we model more against a Facebook or a Twitter or a Google? How do we actually do a development process where every week you're dumping a new version of your ERP platform with new features and new capabilities out? And I'd say from a launch perspective, the engineers are continuously driven to find new and effective ways to redesign the componentry that's on that rocket. And up till a week before that rocket launches, they could literally be down on the launch site pulling a part back off and putting a new, well-designed, well-simulated, secure part back on that thing. So the model that Elon has driven is he is extremely impatient and expects us to continuously look for ways to increase efficiency and effectively by continuously redesigning every step of the process, every particular part we've built.
So do you think that is sort of inherent in what it takes to be a digital enterprise going forward? And that's a different way of working than probably most traditional organizations are. And can you do that in a maybe an area or a microcosm of that to kind of get things going?
So clearly it was the sense I got when I worked for Henry Nicholas at Broadcom. That was basically the culture that I got attracted to when Nick was driving that behavior and characteristic of Broadcom. It's the culture at Tesla. It's the culture at SpaceX. I don't know the guys at Solar City yet. So it does require a founder or an executive to help drive that behavior and characteristic and inspire the organization to get things done and set extremely lofty goals. And then underneath it, fundamentally, you have to digitize to run at that pace. So I wouldn't say to be a digital enterprise, you have to be that way, but to be that way, you need to be a digital enterprise.
Great comment. So do we have some questions to tee up from the audience? Leslie?
Yeah.
Free for all now, so anybody everywhere.
Hassan from H2 Analytics.
Where's Hassan?
Right there. Okay, I'm going to hand the microphone over. Yeah, you can go.
I should try another question on that.
It's a really good one, Hassan. The one
it's a really good one. So my question was with the EU ruling against, well, I don't know if against Google, but with the privacy, what I call it, the right to be forgotten. So last week the EU ruled that the European citizens have the right to remove test results. So my question was for Vinnie because he mentioned a lot of echo. He mentioned how privacy is really important in the European market. How long do you think, or do you think that will impact privacy laws here in the U.S.? Because we hear rumblings, people are concerned, but I don't think it's yet to that level. And do you see that kind of coming over here? Can I go and remove, old records about me of movies that I rented online and things like that from Google search and that kind of thing?
I misread the reaction to the whole NSA issue. I thought that would probably provide some momentum for privacy advocates on the rights. And it had, and it accentuated the privacy concern in Germany and some of the European countries, and they had come back out to the U.S. cloud infrastructure providers to say, you will start putting data centers and those things. So it hasn't quite I don't think it's impacted U.S. privacy sufficient. And if something that big doesn't, I'm not very confident. When you listen to Scott McNeely, get over it, or Larry Ellison did an even more pointed point, which is that they, for a $50 credit card, we gave them so much information about our finances. The most sacred thing that most people try to protect. It's too late to start getting too worried about privacy. Every once in a while, though, you'll get, it's funny how different companies seem to react differently. So Verizon is starting to buy global movement data and selling it to event arenas and so on, so they can position concession stands differently and so on. The last 6 months, kind of backtracked a little bit. So maybe they've gotten some pushback. I think it tends to be individual into healthcare for that. Clearly there is a little more concern. But other industries, I just don't see a broad push toward privacy.
And one of the things I think is interesting on this topic, and that came out, for those that aren't aware, the Europeans kind of passed a law or a rule or an edict saying that people have the right to, be forgotten is sort of the nut of it, or certain activities, events. I wonder, maybe from Vivian or Dave, cannot the technology, like the search tools and stuff, be an actual help or an aid to that? So if you sort of reverse the whole thing around and say, these are the things I really don't want to know out there or whatever, you could sort of flag and tag that. I mean, I think there's a sense that it's all this sort of one-way deal, but isn't there the possibility that you could use data and analytics to kind of help on the other side of the equation?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny, the ruling in your comments about Germany. So I've worn Google Glass for a little while, and I sort of do this Google spokesmodel thing, which tends to involve taking a picture of the person I'm speaking to, and the only people that have ever asked me to delete the photo are Germans. I have no idea quite why that becomes such a big cultural thing for them when clearly it's not for us.
Finally, I was at a event in Germany recently
I wasn't aware of that.
I was at a forum recently where a journalist was moderating a panel, and he was inciting the movement to talk more and more about privacy. And I was surprised that Deutsche Telekom executive actually said, guys, if we are too sensitive about privacy in the US and other Western countries, you're just blow by us. We've got to balance privacy with business. And I was surprised India did the same thing. But Germans are extremely sensitive to my data. They will take it and try to show me that I'm protected. You've got to respect the level of concern that you have. You're much more flippant about that. One of my big complaints is the number of U.S. corporations, they just collect more and more. Check into a hotel and they want more data. That's fine. You haven't convinced me you can protect me. Why do you need it, and what are you doing to protect it?
Do you think we're flippant, or do you think that we feel like we're powerless? There's a difference.
I mean, your U.S. corporations are flippant. Consumers.
But there's actually a demand. There's a demand, right? As consumers, we believe, we who are privacy advocates believe that there's a demand for privacy, a demand for secrecy. There's actually a demand, if you look at the raw data, for ease of use. I'll give you an example, Facebook Connect. Facebook Connect means that I can go to any site like TechCrunch, log in with my Facebook account. Now, there's an investor in my company, David Waxman, who started a company way back in the day called Firefly. Those of us who are old in the internet remember Firefly. Awesome technology, right? Firefly got bought by Microsoft, turned into Microsoft Passport. The goal of it was universal registration. Universal registration, and there were other goals as well, but universal registration meant ease of use. Now, in 97, 98, when Microsoft Passport was out there, we all, consumers, rejected it. Fast forward 10 years, and Facebook Connect is doing the exact same thing. Consumers are not resisting it at all, because of ease of use. Why? Because now I can go to any site, and instead of filling out a long form, I hit the Facebook Connect thing, I'm registered. Ease of use is, you can see it in the numbers, right? I come from CRM and internet advertising. The numbers will tell you what humans in aggregate are doing, not just one individual or two voting against it, but the other 98% who are in favor of it by the conversion rate.
And I think that's the balance that many of us in a variety of experiences, parking to get here tonight, checking in for your hotel or your flight or whatever. If there's a sense of value associated with the experience that I can have and it feels differentiated, or there's some value add, or you get the spiff or the perk or whatever, we tend to be desirous of that. I think the challenge is when you give up a lot of the data and you're not getting anything sort of in return for it, that's where it's an interesting sort of conundrum, if you will.
Do we see a corollary in education anywhere where, and Tim and I actually, I joked years ago when Tim started, they inherited a project where they're putting RFID chips in cocktail waitresses. And I said, great, what are you going to do with it?
They weren't in the waitresses.
So I said,
brilliant idea.
What do we do with that data, right? What were we trying to get out of that? Now, are you seeing, and again, I'm talking about the international sense, are you seeing a corollary anywhere in the different cultures of the rise of sociology in parallel with technology education? Because I see a lot of brick builders. But
somebody asked me at lunch today, can you have too much digital?
Yeah.
In different aspects of life.
Here.
I think certain communities there is a backlash. There's a group called technologists, which is actually avoiding cell phones, avoiding a lot of technologies. I think the younger demographic, everyone, is adapting more to technology. So I don't see that consistently, but you do see some products that people that really need to have things attached to it. Just because you can do it, they're doing stuff, and it won't, marketplace will make sure those products go away. They can be too much technology.
I'm thrilled by the sociological combination to it, though. As you said, you know, I want to know who's researching how cultures will adapt to these things. Like, how many people today would change the name you used on your Facebook account? I don't think. I wouldn't use my name, right? I would have made one up. Everybody, most people would do all.
Yeah, but what scares me is she'd actually figure out your fake name with your real. I'm just going that. All the things we do to hide, they're smart enough just based on your digital footprint to reconnect. So you're not. So your choice is disconnect or understand. They're collecting a crap load of data and they're going to build models that. And back to the waitress, I don't know what they were going to do with the data, but I'm positive 5 years after they've collected that data, she'd come along and go, I'm going to tell you some really interesting things about your wait staff and characteristics of them and where they went and what to hire when, because you collected the data and I can now do the analysis. I didn't know why I was collecting, I just collected it. I mean, I'm just collecting, I got sensors, so I'm going to collect everything. And then later, I'll build a model based on all this data that tells me something I didn't know before. But that's kind of, to me, the scary thing about the digital world we've headed into is the cost of sensors are low. It's easy to collect all this data. We just collected storage is damn cheap. So we just store it forever, and then somebody comes along, like her, and freaks me out and goes, all right, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, a lot of people wondered why Google was getting voice over IP. Yeah. They weren't charging for it. Like, where are they going with it? Well, I heard one of their chief scientists say, we've collected so many voicemails that it's allowed us to train our computers on different accents. But their goal was way beyond just you and I using voice over IP. You know, they're thinking 5 years ahead.
And we know that's happening with video now and every other form of media and data that's coming out. So, Leslie, we're close to wrapping up in time, so I want to make sure that we have a chance to move it outside.
I've got one more for Vivian.
One more? Okay. Because I got
Major.
we got this mic. So we want to
okay. Vivian, my name is Sudhit, and I am really concerned. I want to know how do you collect the data? Which is the various sources that you are collecting my data? Because my next job is dependent on that.
Yeah, I had an article that just came out that said your next job depends on your digital footprint. And
well, what is that?
So, gosh, that may have been Wired UK, but so yeah, and you know what? It should.
I mean,
so
I don't.
Is there
what are the sources? Can be LinkedIn? Yeah. What are the other sources?
GitHub. Yeah, I could answer that question for you. So, like I said, about 100 different websites, many of whom you saw during the video. So, LinkedIn, GitHub, Facebook, Stack Overflow. Like I said, there's a number of them, your personal blog, Twitter. In fact, some of the most interesting stuff comes from the unstructured data. What you tweet, what you say in your blog, what you say in the bio section in LinkedIn.
If I don't have any of those, then what happens?
You don't get a very good score.
No, I don't have a Twitter account.
Cloud score.
So let me put it this way. Right now, we have people involved in the hiring process that do a terrible job. Not because they're bad at their job, but because we're just human and we're full of bias. Man, I could spend the next hour going through paper after paper showing how unavoidable bias is in the hiring process. If I can go out there with a database of 10 million people, and boy, I hope you're in there. If you're not, increase your digital footprint, share the things that you've done in your life, because all we do is provide reasons to hire you. And we can't do that if we don't have data, and that puts bias in our system, and that's something that my team works to counteract. But compare that to the bias in a natural system, I'm just going to guess. Did you go to Stanford or MIT? If you didn't, I know a number of companies that wouldn't consider hiring you, even if you're better than their current tech staff.
I was Professor Brubax's student, so I have some idea on that. And I work with something on big data. So, but the things which really concerns me on this, because you are putting a score against me, and there might be sources you're collecting data which may not be appropriate or correct.
You're absolutely right. I would guess that there's some percentage of people in our system whom we rate lower than they really deserve. But I guarantee you, that is better than not having that system at all. Across the entire population, given the nature of bias, given literally that prior to these sorts of technologies, customers that use our system had very simple rules like, we will only hire from the top 5 schools. The change it makes across the entire population to say, this person never went to college at all. They have rough English skills, but you hire them, they will be incredible. That change has the potential to affect the world. And I'm willing to make the trade of having a positive impact across a large mass of people in exchange for, admittedly, the inevitable fact that there will be some error on the other side. And my hard job is to make certain that that error on the other side is as small as possible.
Somebody smart is
so you're telling us to go.
Let's keep moving on here, but thank you.
She's encouraging you to put more of your digital footprint out there. And if you read Michael Lewis's new book, the scary thing is you find LinkedIn and that information, and none of those high-frequency traders would ever have issued a press release. So we're sharing so much that our employers really cringe what we're sharing out in the through LinkedIn and other social media and so on.
Somebody smart in this room actually made the observation that really what we're doing is we're applying clickstream analytics to the rest of the world. And it was actually a student in your class who's in this room. And it was actually very insightful. It was, to me, I come from clickstream analytics. I used to do that for a living. There is validity in the masses. That is that if you look at thousands of interactions and split test something and this word has a higher conversion rate than that word, to put it simplistically, or this color outperforms that color, by the math, by the numbers, that is telling you something that a human may not be able to tell you. A human, like we used to design websites in the 90s where we said this site looks better than that site. It's beautiful. Beautiful sites don't convert at a higher rate. So it could be the least beautiful site has the highest conversion rate. That's the application of math, and the result of that is profitability. And now we're taking that kind of analytics and applying it in this case to the hiring process, but you can apply that same logic
to flight control data, rockets, to trains on time.
Math works.
I obviously feel I'm much justified. The chips on the staff, it wasn't just was to actually be able to guarantee that we could provide a level of service within a prescribed amount of time based on the value of the customer you were for. And it was to be able to monitor and manage that, to have enough data to see how we could actually change the processes to affect that better. So the goal is often here to create some sort of outcome, and those of you who are data scientists or analysts and the like, there are many things, and this is a topic I think we'll all be prepared and ready to continue to battle with over time, of this sort of how much is too much. But at the end of the day, more data almost always is a better outcome to getting to the right answer and solution. The question is, what do you do with it, and how do you ultimately kind of deal with it? With that, I'm going to thank our panel, which very engaging and stimulating sort of discussion, which will not end. Thank you all very much. Next slide. So I want to kind of encourage you all to provide us some feedback on the survey. No surprise, we prefer it digitally, but if you prefer the mechanical method, please do. And then on the next one, please stay in touch. We've got not only the next event that I talked about coming up, we are working diligently on some educational programs, obviously being affiliated with the university, that's near and dear to our heart, and research is a core part of what we're ultimately trying to drive and do. And so you brought up a number of topics today. There are a whole host of others that are just ripe and rich for more discovery and definition around that. So keep in touch, let us know. Right now, per my commitment, you guys were amazing and awesome, and we could go forever, and we'll go a bit longer. So I'm going to hustle everybody out of the room, and we're going to head back out to the reception area, and you can mix and match and chat. Thank you all very much for coming.